Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure, or who is covetous, that is, an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not become partners with them.
So here's a question for you. Is there such a thing as morality? If you ask the secular person on the street, they will say, absolutely, there is. Absolutely, there's something as morality. The vast majority of Americans would acknowledge that morality exists. The conflict comes when you try to define what it is. So 100 years ago, most people didn't really care about the environment or even about racism or poverty that much, but they were staunchly against sleeping around, and homosexuality and transgenderism were not even part of the public discussion at all. So that was all broadly condemned. Today, it's the opposite. The biggest sins are racism, ignoring the plight of the poor, climate change, and probably the biggest sin is intolerance. But on sexual issues, nobody cares who you sleep with or who you love. It's been a flip-flop, but there is morality, at least a kind of morality. So, in fact, the motto for today, and we've talked about this before, is you can do anything you want as long as you don't hurt anyone. I suppose, though, that the deeper question is, what is morality based on? The entire Enlightenment project was one that put nature as the center of everything, which included us, and people could have dignity and morality without God. That was the whole point. So philosophers and writers have made these valiant attempts to defend morality without God. So here's one, for instance. Atheist and psychologist Steven Pinker, who's a convinced secular humanist, believes that universal human rights can be grounded in reason without appeal to God. So I've been reading this book by Rebecca McLaughlin called Confronting Christianity, and she says this about Pinker. He recognizes that science cannot do that work for us, but he compares the discovery of objective moral principles to the discovery of mathematical principles. Nature gave us concepts of 1, 2, 3, and many. We figured out the rest. Perhaps universal, objective, ethical principles are similarly within our grasp. So with all due respect, I would take issue with Steven Pinker because morality keeps changing. So if you're going to discover something, math doesn't keep changing, you discover it, but morality keeps changing. And I'm not sure what morality he thinks has been discovered. There are, however, numerous atheists who are very honest about morality. They're very honest about their position. In 2012, Duke University professor Alex Rosenberg addressed a series of questions from an atheist perspective in the Atheist Guide to Reality. So he asks the questions and then he answers them. And here they are. Is there a God? No. What is the nature of reality? What physics says it is. What is the purpose of the universe? There is none. What is the meaning of life? Ditto. Why am I here? Just dumb luck. Does prayer work? Of course not. Is there a soul? Is it immortal? Are you kidding? Is there free will? Not a chance. What happens when I die? Everything pretty much goes on as before except us. What is the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There is no moral difference between them. Why should I be moral? Because it makes you feel better than being immoral, whatever morality is for him. Is abortion, euthanasia, suicide, paying taxes, foreign aid, or anything else you don't like forbidden, permissible, or sometimes obligatory? Anything goes. So this is an intellectual from Duke University, atheist, really giving honest answers about what he actually believes. If God's not there, then really there is no morality. Anything goes at all. At least he's being honest about that. And here's the thing, this thing about do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone is also nonsense, because if God's not there, then it doesn't matter if you hurt anyone, because there is no morality. There is no right and wrong, and it doesn't matter in the long run anyway. When you die, it's over. It really doesn't matter. So most secular people don't want to go that far. They have a definite ethical standard, and it may not be in regard to sex, but it certainly is in terms of human rights. And included here are minorities, and especially sexual minorities, and poverty and immigration. And then modern day orthodoxy, on the other hand, has determined that abortion is perfectly legitimate for almost any reason, even as a means of birth control. And this has actually been a shift in our society in recent years. So my question is, where does all of that end? Without some kind of an objective standard, it really does end where Duke Professor Rosenberg says it ends. Anything goes. But then there has been this giant conservative pushback, bringing morality back into our society. That's what is the pushback. We need to bring morality back into our society, and we need to elect leaders that will legislate this morality, and in this way, we will change our culture. The narrative goes something like this: the godless heathens are taking our country down, and we need to take our country back and impose Christian law and order and morality on everyone. It almost sounds like the Crusades. And all it's done is to create division, hostility, and bedlam, and no place for the gospel at all. But this actually is not God's way. Paul is adamant here for godly morality, yes, and for God to be honored, yes. But it has to do with something far deeper than our behavior. It goes to the depths of what we love, what we long for. So look at what it tells us in verse 1. Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. He's calling on us not to take America back, but to walk in love. This is what he's calling us to. And how did Christ love us? He gave his life for us. What incredible dignity he bestows on us. Can you imagine? The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords went to a cross to pay for my self-centered indulgences. And this changes everything about the way we read this passage or any other passage for that matter. So I'm not advocating for less than morality, than Christian biblical morality, but for far, far more. So after that long introduction, let me give you my 3 points. And they're very brief. Sex, greed, and Jesus. Those are some good 3 points, aren't they? Sex, greed, and Jesus. So let's talk about them. All right, number 1, sex. So Paul is adamant here. Is he just a prude? Is that his problem? Is that what Christianity is? Just take the fun out of everything. So it says in verse 3, but sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. It's not just that you should not engage in sexual immorality, but you shouldn't even be talking about it. So these 2 words, sexual immorality, are only one Greek word. And the Greek word is porneia, which is where we get pornography from, okay? Porneia. And its actual definition is unchastity or fornication, which essentially it means this. In a biblical definition of this word, it means any kind of sexual contact outside of marriage between one man and one woman. That's the biblical definition of fornication. Any kind of sexual contact outside of marriage between one man and one woman. Well, this certainly goes against modern day orthodoxy and modern day secular morality. So why is Paul so adamant about this? Why is he so adamant? Do you remember the discussion back in chapter 4 about the new self and the old self? Well, the old self is one that sees itself as the center of its own world, and it's looking out for itself and gratifying itself. And so Paul is saying that any kind of porneia comes from that world view. That sex outside of marriage is inherently self-centered. It's either for self-gratification or to get something from the other person that you think you need, maybe approval or love or some other kind of thing. And so you engage in that kind of behavior. That's what the old self is. But then Christ comes, and Paul is adamant that this ultimately, what Paul is saying about your old self is that it strips you of your dignity. The dignity given to all people because they were created in the image of God. And in addition, the dignity that was given to us by Christ when he died for us and gave us a new self, one that does not live for itself, but lives for the sake of loving God and loving others. A self that's willing to sacrifice its own comfort, gratification, and anything else for the sake of others. See, that's the new self. There couldn't be more diametrically opposed. One is, I want to gratify what I want to gratify. The other is, I will deny myself for your good. For your good. But there's something else here. And he's so adamant that this is damaging to us that he goes further. Verse 4, let there be no filthiness, no foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place. So lots of us have engaged in that, right? I mean, that's just so common. So I'm not here to give you some kind of a legalistic list of what it looks like to talk in a filthy or foolish or crude, joking way. You're going to have to decide that for yourself, but I will give you the principle, okay? Anything that would demean the beautiful gift of sex between married partners is out of place, especially humor. Why? Because it's untruthful. If it's demeaning the right way, it means it's untruthful. It denies what God made beautiful. And second, because it might tempt us to fall into sin. When you joke about it, you become desensitized to it. So let me give you a little parenthesis here, okay? But I promise to come right back to the point. What is it that changes a culture? Because I'm pretty sure this is what we all want. We want our culture to change, right? We want our culture to bow the knee to Jesus. We would love for that to be the case. What is it that changes a culture? For some reason, most evangelical Christians in America think that it's the political process that changes things. Now, don't get me wrong. You need to vote. You need to be involved in the process. It's your right as a citizen. More than that, I wish we had young people who were schooled and taught in theology that would go into politics and be Christians in a world that doesn't seem like it's very Christian at the moment. So that's what I believe about that. However, politics has very little chance of changing much. So what is it that changes a culture? Well, if you look at the Enlightenment, the three big figures of where we are today in the way people think, the three big figures were Rousseau, Marx, and Freud. Arguably, these are the main ones. There's many, many others, many other intellectuals that have written and talked about this. You have Nietzsche and you have many, many others. But none of them are politicians. And from these intellectuals, it was filtered down into universities and into the arts, where it was disseminated for mass consumption. You wonder why I want to push for us to be involved in the arts and in some other way that we can make culture? Because we need to make new culture. That's how things change. We need to make new culture because we've got to make culture to change culture. It's not going to happen with politics. So, let me give you an example. Jeff McDowell, one of our staff members, and I were talking about this week. We were talking about sitcoms. And long before The Office, there was this long-running series called Friends. So, arguably, the two most influential sitcoms were Friends, which ran from 1994 to 2004, and then The Office, which was 2005 for like 9 years or something like that after that. So this was before The Office even started. It's Friends, and it was so popular. And truth be told, it's still outrageously popular. You can watch them all on one of the, Peacock, one of them, I don't know. And one of the wonderful things about that show is that there was this long-term, through thick and thin friendship of 6 people, 3 men and 3 women. They stuck with each other through all obstacles. That is very appealing. Who wouldn't want to have 5 other friends that were with you no matter what, that you got together with all the time? That's actually a wonderful thing. But here's the thing about Friends. And I think it was almost a turning point in American society that sent us down a different road. And how so? The sexual ethic that we currently have was on very prominent display in Friends. Sleeping around, watching pornography, and laughing about it. And moving in with people and engaging in casual sex was not just tolerated, it was celebrated. And all the while, none of the downsides are there. Everything is wonderful. You have your cake and you can eat it too. But there's this huge lie perpetuated by the show that when you're young, sex is part of the fun of a relationship and there are no downsides. Well, as I pointed out 2 weeks ago, this is unraveling because people are seeing the heartache and emptiness of casual or uncommitted for the long haul sex. It's destroying people. So Paul is not a prude. God is not a prude. He just made us for something so much better than a casual roll in the hay or than a cheap laugh about something so destructive. But do you see what I'm saying about the arts? It is powerful, far more powerful than politics because it gets into people's psyches. How will we be culture makers? We need Christian intellectuals. We need Christian professors. We need Christian artists that don't make two-dimensional cardboard cutout kinds of artistic endeavors, but artists that are respected and creative and influential. How do we promote this in our church? It just seems so impossible to me. Because everybody's got their minds on the political thing. And there's anger about who's going to get, we're fearful who might get elected or who might not get elected. And I'm saying, I beg you that we think in other terms about how we might, as a church, change the culture around us. Back to sexual immorality. We'll see something else here too. Number 2 is greed. The other points aren't as long, sorry. Verse 3, but sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you as is proper among the saints. So there's covetousness there. That's what the ESV calls it. The Greek word is pleonexia, and one of the lexicons defines it as greediness, insatiableness, avarice, or covetousness, as what's in the ESV. It's greed. And the definition of greed is this: a selfish and excessive desire for more of something. A selfish and excessive desire for more of something. Why would Paul put this here with sexual immorality? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. It's because sexual immorality is basically greediness. A selfish and excessive desire for more of something. For men especially, when you see something sexual, a switch clicks in your brain, and sometimes the desire is overpowering. This is actually what greed is: an overpowering desire for something that is not yours. And what Paul is telling us here is about the power of sex, and when it is used in an immoral way, it does damage. Why is that? Because it's not love. It's basically that I will take from you to gratify myself in order to fulfill my greedy desire. And Paul wants us to run from it because it only leads to heartache. Malcolm Muggeridge, a British journalist, writer, and Christian apologist, says this: we seek wealth and find we've accumulated worthless pieces of paper. We seek security and find we've acquired the means to blow ourselves and our little earth to smithereens. We seek carnal indulgence only to find ourselves involved in the prevailing erotomania. And the prevailing erotomania, which is defined as, it means excessive sexual desire. This prevailing erotomania is a cruel taskmaster, never giving our souls what we actually long for, which is unconditional, committed love and acceptance and rest. Our fantasies are completely unrewarding. Anytime we pursue self-gratification, it ends in emptiness and often despair. This is the lie that's been so perpetrated, brothers and sisters, that you can be fulfilled by pursuing your own pleasures and self-gratifications. It's just not true. And this is why verse 5, Paul says something very hard. It's a hard passage. Look at verse 5 and verse 6. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure, or who is covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. You notice that? It's calling Christ God. Christ and God. There's no article in front of God. That's just a little sidelight. Pretty cool thought right there. Christ and God. He's not only Christ, he's God. All right. Anyway, verse 6, let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. So he's not saying here that if you have done anything like this, or if you've fallen into this trap, that you do not belong to him, or that there is no forgiveness. See, anyone who asks forgiveness will receive it in full. If you're involved in sexual immorality, you can turn from it. That's the beauty of the gospel. You can turn from it and you can receive full forgiveness from it. That's not what Paul is saying. What he is saying is that if you ultimately reject Jesus in pursuit of your own gratification and greed, you will end up in a bad place, both here in this world, and this has been proven. This is what Romans 1 talks about, is the wrath of God being poured out because it leaves you empty. It leaves you feeling nothingness. It leaves you numb. Sexual immorality leaves you numb. That's part of the wrath of God because it's not God's way. So both here in this world and in the life to come, you will get exactly what you want, an eternity without God, which means an eternity without joy and peace and love, because he is the source of all of those things. You can have joy and peace and love here and now because he's in the world. But when that day comes, he withdraws himself and you get what you want, an eternity without him. But you don't get any of the other things either. Peace, joy, and love. And so he says in verse 7, do not become partners with them. Does he mean that we can't have friends who are unbelievers or are caught up in sexual immorality or that think differently than we do? No, I don't think he's saying that at all. What he's saying is that sexual immorality is so powerful that it will cloud our minds and keep us from Jesus. It clicks a switch and we don't think clearly. What is it that you watch on TV? What do you find funny and entertaining? Does it trivialize God's good gift of sex? Does it lead you into temptation? Paul is saying, run. These are things that change how we think and opens the door to more serious things. Paul wants us to run. Number 3, Jesus. Verse 2, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Let me just say this. Jesus is not looking for morality police. He's not looking for morality police. He's looking for an army of people that will love well. This includes men and women that truly love each other in the church. There may be someone of the opposite sex that you hit it off with or that you're attracted to that's not your spouse. But here's the thing. Instead of indulging your thought life, which is the sure way to a destructive road, and it's the easiest path, get in bed at night, start thinking, whatever. There's lots of ways to get your thoughts going in a certain direction because it feels good in the moment to get that thought life going. So instead of indulging your thought life, you love well by saying that you never want even a hint of sexual immorality to affect that other person. because you know that it will be a disaster for them and you want to protect them at all cost. You get your eyes off of yourself and you put it on the other person and say, that would be horrible for them. That's loving them well. That is saying no to your own desires and yes to doing what is best for the other person. It's giving up what you want for the sake of another. That's called love, not self-centeredness. Beauty and the Beast, I'm sure most of you have seen it. A Walt Disney animated movie tells the story about the beautiful girl Belle and a beast who had been a prince, but he was condemned many years before because he was condemned to a life of shame and ugliness as a beast because he could not love unconditionally. So you probably know the story, but one night Belle's father, Maurice, gets lost in the forest and is thrown from his horse. Well, when the horse returns without Maurice the next day, Belle sets off to find him, and she follows her father's horse to an imposing castle. And it looks very scary, set deep within the forest. And the castle looms over Belle. It's twisted and hulking, and it inspires all kinds of fear. And when she finds her father's hat lying inside the gate, she cautiously enters, even though she's terrified. Well, once inside, a talking candlestick leads Belle to a dungeon where she finds her father huddled in a cell. He's alone, he's cold, he's sick. Maurice, having seen the monstrous beast who put him there, pleads with Belle to leave. Leave, Belle. But Belle refuses and tries to free him. And then suddenly a booming voice growls from the darkness, "What are you doing here?" It was Beast. Belle learns that her father's being held for trespassing and that there's no escape from the punishment for his offense. As her father gasps and wheezes, he says, "Belle," he says, "don't." But Belle says, "Take me instead." And Beast is startled by this. "You would take his place? If I did, would you let him go?" "Yes, but you must promise to stay here forever." "You have my word," Belle vows. "Done." And though he's puzzled by her sacrifice, Beast makes the trade and frees Belle's father. Brothers and sisters, this is exactly what Jesus did for us. He didn't think about what was best for him. He thought about what was best for us. And he put his money where his mouth was, and he went to a cross in our place. He did this because of his overwhelming love for us. And so the answer is to get our eyes off of sexual immorality and on to Jesus. Invite him into your thought life. Invite him into your daily routine. Invite him into your inordinate desires. Let him work his power in you through the Spirit. If you're lying in bed and those thoughts are coming, invite him in. Invite him in. "Come, Jesus. Come be with me in this. I have no power in front of this. This is a roaring monster that will devour me. I need help." And he does. He helps by the power of his Spirit. And so when we look at this passage where he asks us to run from sexual immorality and to not even joke about it, we know that it is not just some cold, hard rule put there to hold us back. No, he wants us to have life and have it abundantly. And so he calls us to walk in love. And this is the overriding principle that will change our lives because he loved us first. That's the gospel, and it changes everything. Let's pray.